I'm Hannah Weiss, the Education Manager at the Science Museum of Western Virginia, and this is your Moment of STEM. And this week, we're going to talk about the Bone Wars. So the Bone Wars was this huge fight, almost at the start of American paleontology. And it was this feud between two paleontologists, Cope and Marsh. And they were brilliant scientists who pretty much grew up with the field. Their fight happened at the end of the 1800s. And the word dinosaur wasn't even coined until about the 1840s. These two were amazing paleontologists, but they hated each other. No one's quite sure how this fight started. One idea is that, when Cope and Marsh first met, they kind of met as colleagues. And Cope actually invited Marsh back to visit one of the fields he'd been pulling fossils from. Actually, one of the fields that the first complete skeleton was discovered in the United States. And Marsh, as they were leaving, bribed the people who owned the field to send all future finds to him. Not the nicest of moves, but probably only the opening salvo in this war. The huge kind of tipping point probably happened a little bit later, when Cope was presenting about a skeleton that he'd assembled, the Elasmosaurus, plesiosaur, not even a dinosaur. When he put the skeleton together, he took the head and put it at the shorter end, at the end where there are fewer vertebrae. He was fairly certain that that was the front part of the animal. And it's not too unusual for him to have thought that. The plesiosaur was basically a huge reptile, and a lot of reptiles that we know today have a really huge snake-like tail. But Marsh, when he looked at that skeleton, realized that there were some features there that pointed to the head being at the end of that long snake-like part. And Marsh publicly corrected Cope. This pretty much set them into this huge fight. They hated one another. And this carried out through their entire careers. Most of what we know about them today, despite their discoveries, is the Bone War, this huge fight that they had that started out west. Most of the dinosaurs and skeletons and other fossilized things being discovered at that time were being discovered out west. And one place in particular, Como Bluffs, had incredible finds. Cope and Marsh both assembled teams to go out and find as much as they could. But when they did this, their teams, the men that reported to them, were awful to one another. They spied on one another. They bribed people who owned land. They may even have destroyed finds that they couldn't publish on and backfilled lots to prevent the other person from seeing what they'd found. At one point, their workers even stopped working to throw rocks at each other. This fight was crazy and really sensationalized in American media. In fact, most people today know Cope and Marsh not because of what they discovered, but because of this intense battle that they had that played out in the public sphere. In fact, this fight was so intense, it actually drove their mentor out of the field. Could not deal with how awful it had become. These men were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But as a result of what they did and their lives spent trying to best the other one and slam one another, they both died pretty much broken alone. In fact, Marsh even had most of his collection repossessed by the American government. Ironically, due to a policy that he himself had created to try and keep Cope's collection away. But even though these two men are mostly known from their huge feud, between them they actually discovered an incredible number of species and described them. In fact, most of the ones that really capture our attention, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, these are creatures that these two men described. Now, part of their fight also had them publishing things super quickly and not being very careful maybe about what they found. And some of the mistakes that they made are things that have also carried on into current paleontology. In fact, the whole Brontosaurus Apatosaurus thing, that's Cope and Marsh. Now, paleontology today is a lot better. There's not throwing stones at one another, but it is still a contentious field. There are a lot of debates that are really, really public. In fact, we even talked about one of them on a former Moment of STEM, the Spinosaurus episode. If you would like to know more about the absolute ridiculousness that was the Bone Wars, you can check out the links below. Otherwise, I'm Hannah Weiss from the Science Museum of Western Virginia, and I just have one more really cool thing I found. When I was researching for this video, I came across the best phrase I have ever seen. So you remember how Cope and Marsh had to assemble these teams to go out west? Well, one of the people I was reading described them as science cowboys. And since reading that, I have wanted to be nothing else in my life. Except for maybe Miss Frizzle.